episode for the aspiring network scientist with Michele Coscia. What's the rumpus? I'm Asaf Shapira, and this is NETfrix, the network science podcast. Today, we're going to have a talk with the one and only Michele Coscia, by day an associate professor at IT University, and by night the author of the Connecting Humanities blog for network science. In between, he managed to squeeze out a monumental book titled The Atlas for the Aspiring Network Scientist, which will be in our To Talk About list. We'll also review some of his recent papers, talk about the upcoming Network Science Conference, and the satellite event he's running. Together, we'll make history by telling the first network science joke in a podcast. And lastly, we'll try to crack open the mystery behind Italians' obsession with network science and podcasts. So, Michele Coscia, what's the rumpus?
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me to the podcast. I'm really happy to be able to talk to you.
Cool, it's an honor to have you. Can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, gladly. So I'm a weird researcher, and as many network scientists are, it seems that no two network scientists have the same background. So I am a digital humanist by training, because when I finished high school, I was undecided if I wanted to take philosophy or computer science, and then I said, well, digital humanities seems exactly the thing that fits for me. So I did my bachelor and my master in Pisa. And then I got my PhD in computer science, because there is no PhD in digital humanities, or at least there wasn't when I graduated. So technically, I'm a computer scientist, but I don't like to call me like that. In fact, all my PhD thesis was all about social networks. So I was still trying to bring the humanities into my PhD study. And then I spent a super long postdoc in the United States, in Boston. It was a great time, 6 years at the Center for International Development, where I have taken part in many of the projects that we are also going to talk about today. And then a friend told me, hey, there is a great opportunity to create something special with networks in Copenhagen. And at the time, it was just him. But by now, our group has grown and includes super cool people. We are one of the fastest growing group in a very fastest growing university. So
Oh, cool.
we're very happy. And we are called NERDS, Network Data and Society.
Yeah, that's a super cool name, as you said.
Yeah, I mean, it was a long brainstorming to try and find a name, and I think it was time well spent.
Cool. About the digital humanities, it's like, I think it's the best aspect of humanity, right? The digital
Yeah, I
aspect.
mean,
I say you don't want it to be too human, you want some digital.
yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, in a sense, I was thinking just today that as we progress, every scientist is a computer scientist, even if you're doing research in history or philosophy, because we do everything with computers, so we need to know something about them. And so the digital humanist is somebody who knows and uses the tools of computer science to aid human endeavors. I am just part now of a project that we submitted for hopefully getting a grant about using natural science to analyze the structure, the evolution, and the death of the League of Nations. It's a work of historiography, and I think it's fantastic that you can use networks to do this kind of stuff.
Well, that's cool. What drew you to the network science world?
I think to borrow something from the introduction of the book that I wrote is the fact that the graph model that is at the basis of network analysis is such a simple model that allows you to use simple operation to say super interesting things about real world phenomenon. And the real world phenomena that I'm talking about is almost literally everything, because almost literally everything in reality is made of parts that in some sense interact with each other at some level. You can draw Feynman diagrams to describe how elementary particles interact with each other. And those are, in a sense, networks, because it's all about interactions, up to describing, art history as a series of works of art that are citing each other and are taking pieces from each other and re-elaborating what came before. And I'm not making this example by random, because I shared my desk while I was in Boston with Maximilian Schick, was this awesome art historian who is doing great stuff with network science. And that's why I say that there are no two network scientists that have the same background, because you can get from physicists to art history in a blimp. Like in my case, it was just walking down a corridor.
Wow, that's cool. If you're mentioning the networks of the arts, we lost all the computer science students that might be listening. So we'll
Okay.
continue without them. I've seen you plug the book you wrote. Do you want to elaborate?
Yeah, so it's just earlier this year I published this. Well, published is a strong word, but I finished this atlas for the aspiring network scientist, which is a work of love that it took me a couple of years to make, and it stemmed from the fact that I started teaching network science, network analysis to at the IT University of Copenhagen, and I was using as a reference the absolutely outstanding book from Laszlo Barabasi, the network science book.
Sorry, the network science, you mean the online book he published not so long ago?
Yeah, it's a couple of years ago, and it's for free available online. There is a website with exercise. It's great. There's great visualization there as well. And I wanted to take a little bit of more of a breadth, like a wide scope for my class. So at some level, at some point, I found myself writing very long notes for my students. And once the course was over, I say, well, this is half of a book. I might as well write the other half. And so it took me 2 years to finish because once you start and you get a little bit perfectionist, it's very difficult to stop. But at some point, I had to stop. And the book is intended to be an atlas. It's a reference point. It doesn't really contain any deep information about any of the topics that it covers, but the aim is to cover as many topics as possible. So I don't think there is a network science book out there that covers from, you do the Barabasi-Albert's network growth model to graph embeddings and to frequent subgraph mining to network visualization. So none of these chapters go very deep into these topics, but all the topics are there. It's basically a summary of every topic that I either learned or come to know during all my career as a network scientist, which started in 2009 with my PhD thesis, which I remember it was kind of shocking. It's another reason why I wrote the book is that I started in this group where the director of the group said, "Okay, you are starting your PhD," and I think that our strategic objective for our group is to become a good group in network science. No one in this group has done network science ever before. So you're going to be the first. So I heard that there is this paper that was the structure and function of complex network by Mark Newman, was published in 2003. She said, I know that there is this paper. This paper contains a very good summary of network science. Here, read it. It was like 45 pages. And then you start. And I have nothing against Newman's paper. It's absolutely outstanding. But the first thing you read about network science, without anybody explaining you anything else.
Let me guess. Network models.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It was network models, and then it was a lot of math about how to infer the diameter or the shortest path length of the random graph, the Erdos-Renyi random graph, and stuff like that. So it's great, but it's not the first thing I will read. So like I really would have wished to have the book that I wrote when I started, and now the book exists. So maybe.
No one ever said I came for the network models and stayed for the science. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Well, full disclosure, I read the atlas, not all of it, of course. I have a life, career, family, but I really loved what I read, and the small community in Israel that works around the network science really loved it, and some even translated it. I did some summarizing up too, and especially the episodes I usually don't talk about in the podcast, like the visualization, which was very cool, and I really learned a lot. And the thing I liked most about the Atlas was that it was well written, funny even, and that's not something you really expect when you see an Atlas. And I've seen a few Atlases before, and applicable. And talked about the main issues. Most people look for applications, and when they look at the network models, they don't understand what they are supposed to do with it. And when you talk about real world problems, I think it captures people's imagination, and they feel more attracted to the subject. Well, that's my take. And you did it.
I think that if I had this kind of glowing review, I would have put in the back cover of the book. So maybe for the second edition, I can quote you on what you think about it. But I mean, I think that readers should really feel that you are very excited about what you're talking about, because if network science doesn't excite me, that I live and breathe network science every day, then it has no chance to excite or attract people who have heard of it for the first time.
Exactly. We aim high in this podcast, so now you set the bar here, and you have a half an hour to amaze us.
Okay.
So, can you tell us about some recent studies you've made?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things that is the most exciting research that I put out last year was this research about business travels. Because for a complete coincidence, I ended up writing this paper with two amazing co-authors, Frank Nefke and Ricardo Hausmann, both from the Center for International Development. We ended up writing this paper on what happens when international travel stops, and it happens to be published in the middle of 2020. I think that there couldn't have been a better or maybe a worse moment to publish exactly that paper. It's entirely accidental. The paper has a very long history. We started working on it probably 2014, 2015. It's been a very long journey. I wish papers were babies, because it means that after 9 months you're done with it. That's not the case. But so it's entirely completely by accident that it ended up being published in summer of last year. The starting point is kind of simple, is trying to figure out how countries or regions start producing new things, starting having new activities. Like, how do you start an industry in a place that doesn't have anybody who can perform that job, right? So there are many components of how you start a new economic activity. One could be the tools. You want to have a factory, you want to make cars. Well, you are going to need these robots or like this kind of infrastructure to make a car. I mean, I don't know how to make a car, but I assume that there is some set of tools that you need to use, right? But that is definitely not the problem, right? Because if it's only about the tools, then you can just package the tool and ship them to a place where it's not making cars, and all of a sudden cars will start appearing. And that's not the case. So there is something else. And somebody say, okay, well, there are some instructions on how these factories are supposed to be run. And this is even easier to transfer than tools, because we have the internet. We have an infinite highway of information that can transfer information at the speed of light. So it is not only the instruction on how to use those machines. And there is this theory of knowledge that says, well, there is a component of knowledge that is tacit, in the sense that you cannot embed it in tools and you cannot just tell people how to do it. It is something that you need to learn how to do it by either practicing, or by having somebody explain it to you and doing it with you. So there is this kind of social component to knowledge transfer. And then there is a part of know who, not just know how, but know who, is that you can do amazing things, but if nobody knows about those things that you're making, then it's as if you're not making them, right? So if you want to get a business deal, you need to know how to connect with the people who are going to make that business deal happening. And so know how and know who are very, very hard to transfer. There are a lot of experiments that shows that you can just tell people. You have to learn by doing. Ricardo, the real engine behind this project, says that sure, I can get Rafa Nadal to explain to me exactly everything that he does that allows him to serve in tennis the way he serves in tennis. But after he's done explaining it, I am not going to be able to serve like Rafa Nadal. I will have to try and try and try as many times as Rafa Nadal did, probably even more, because he's very talented and I'm not.
Don't sell yourself short. That's what I'd say.
I'm pretty sure that I'm very, very bad tennis player. So then the thing is that, okay, like, how do we test this theory, right? There are some experiments that test this theory, but we want to see the effect of this theory at the macro level. And so we partner with the Mastercard Center for Inclusive Growth, because they had this great data set that they allow us to access in a aggregated and anonymized form, that includes all the foreign transactions that were made by corporate issue credit cards. So these cards are issued to a corporation for work rather than to individuals for personal use. And so every time you see one of these cards making an expenditure in a country that is different from the one it was issued in, you know that somebody has traveled from the country of origin that issued the card to the country of destination where the expenditure was made. And then we do some mathematical trickery that I'm not going to explain because it's just too boring for a podcast, to infer who are the industry that are sending these travelers. And so we can use this thing to create some sort of index of like how many travelers from a specific industry rather than from a specific country a destination gets. And then we can make all sorts of things trying to infer, okay, is this associated with growth in the particular industry in the country of destination? Do the new industry appear? Does it grow faster? And we do see that effect. I think that it's kind of amazing that we actually are able to see that effect, because business travel, after all, is a very, very weak signal. Zoom, Skype, and this kind of conferencing software existed before Corona, but companies were not using them, or at least they were not using them enough to cancel the business travel. It was $1 trillion industry, business travel. And so just by looking at the number of people from an industry that a country receive, we are able to actually show that that industry will grow in the country of destination, which is kind of amazing. And so then you can reverse the result that we found, which is exactly what happened with Corona. You can say, okay, what if a country or all countries stop sending business travelers? How much do we expect the global GDP to drop? And it's kind of alarming. Like the United States, for instance, has a huge impact. So if the United States stops sending business travelers, our math says that the global GDP will drop by 1%. Just by that fact, because new industries stop growing and stop appearing because they don't get the knowledge coming from the United States, just because of business travelers, nothing else. 1% of the GDP, global GDP, and that's just the United States.
What inspired you to do this work? Because I don't know, the Walking Dead series or something. Because in 2015, I don't think we even thought about this possibility.
Oh, definitely, we were not thinking actually seriously about business travel ending. We were more thinking on the line of the Atlas of Economic Complexity, which is another atlas I was involved in. I'm an atlas guy, and and because it was all based on this assumption of the sticky nature of knowledge, of tacit knowledge, and how hard it is to transfer knowledge. But I didn't actually test the theory. We just assuming that the theory was true in order to reach some conclusions. The basis of that atlas was the product space, which is a network where you are connecting products, let's say, I don't know, cars and airplanes that countries can export, and you're connecting them if a significant number of countries are co-exporting them. The implicit assumption here is that if many countries can co-export these two products, then these two products must have something in common. They must have some sort of knowledge behind their production that is in common, and so they are related somehow.
Some kind of projection, you mean? Like
Yeah, exactly. It's basically all you can observe is like this bipartite network connecting a country can export that product. So this is what you observe. This is the explicit structure. But the implicit structure is the projection of that. So you're just make the countries disappear and you just have the connection between products. And then you can do lots of interesting stuff because you can see how countries move in this product space. You can try to describe how complex the occupation of the country in the product space is. And this economic complexity index, which is a consequence of this research, is actually strongly predictive of future growth. So you can see that countries that have the highest complexity index are like Japan, Germany. So these kind of very strong economies. We based it on an assumption that was not really tested. And so we were trying to test this assumption. And this business travel paper was like the idea of making this paper was testing this assumption.
you said that the businessmen going back and forth from different countries is related to knowledge, but maybe you can interpret it in a context of trust. I mean, when you do business, you want to meet the people you know. Maybe it's not knowledge that you transfer, but trying to build trust.
Whatever it's in these links of the business travel is something super complex that we are at the moment oversimplifying. There is absolutely 100% an element of trust, which we are trying to capture by using the term know who, because it's like building the social relationship. And then there is also a bunch of other analysis that actually didn't make into the paper that builds on this kind of complex effects. For instance, we were made this preliminary analysis that we didn't manage to make into the paper that says, okay, so how strong is this effect of business travel in creating these new industries or actually trading? So like creating these trade deals, depending on some characteristic of the product or the industry that we are looking at. And we were seeing that actually business travels matter much, much, much more if the product is complex. I think it was a Lemur category of products that says that divides products into three categories. One is the product that basically you don't need to know anything about the product and you know what you're getting. So like if you're buying bananas, you're buying bananas. It's like a commodity and you just get it. If you're buying a barrel of oil, it's a barrel of oil. And then there are products that at the other end of the spectrum is that are very specific and you need to know exactly what you're buying. And so we were seeing that basically business travel had almost zero effect when it comes to buying these bulk commodity goods, but has a super, super strong effect if you are actually buying like some complex machinery that you need for your plant, and then you need to exactly know the specification that your workers need. And so this kind of trust is super important because you need to go there, you need to see the machine, and you need to know the person that is selling to you because you need to know that this person is actually not selling you something that is actually not what you think it is. So yeah, absolutely. Like, science never ends, right? Science is just fractal. The more you answer, the more question you get to ask. So yeah, I suppose that we could start writing the new paper about networks of trust.
It's okay. It's okay. Yeah, yeah. And you talked about something that didn't make it to the paper, so you heard it here first, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Okay, so I'll let you off the hook on this one. And can you tell us about more studies you made, maybe about the disinformation in social networks? I'm just guessing here.
Yes. I mean, this is another super interesting track of research. I am very eclectic, so yeah. I also dab into social media disinformation, and I had this work that I'm doing with Luca Rossi, which was the person who brought me to Copenhagen. It's actually a cool story because basically I was just in his office. I was trying to waste his time because I was bored, and we were just talking about random stuff, and it was trying to get rid of me and says, okay, I'm going to show you something interesting, so maybe you're going to go away. So he got some data about flags on Facebook. So like flagging means that a user sees something that somebody shared and say, okay, well, this thing seems like fake news, so I'm going to flag it. If a news item receives enough flags, then it's going to be sent to fact checkers by Facebook to figure out whether this thing is actually fake news or not.
The dataset you talked about was released by Facebook about a year ago, and what puzzled me was that I haven't seen a lot of papers about it. Facebook collects a lot of information. I don't know how many opportunities there are that it releases them to the general public, but just a few weeks ago, Suni Lehman tweeted about his subjective feeling that provocative posts get more engagement, and he asked about data that could verify this, and I think this data set is the key. So you actually use this data set. That's cool.
It does come with some strings attached, being able to access this data. So it's not as open. It's not that there is just a download button and you can get it. He had actually a subset of it that it was only for the Italian Facebook. This is like every website and the number of flags that he received on Facebook. The funny thing was that you would expect that the news organization that get the most flags, they are the ones that spread more misinformation. Like, okay, we were looking at the Italian data set, but if you are American, you will expect, I don't know, very extreme right wing or very extreme left wing content, like, I don't know, Infowars or Breitbart, to be more represented in this data set. But that's actually was not at all the case. The newspapers that were getting the most flags were the ones that actually are the most neutral. In Italian, we have the Repubblica, Corriere della Sera. They do have their precise leaning. So Repubblica is a little bit center left, and Corriere is a little bit center right. But they are mostly central. Like they are what you will call mainstream media. So they are relatively center, and yeah, they're not perfect, but it's not that they just straight up invent things. And so that was super puzzling. It's like, why is that the neutral sources are the ones that receive most flags.
Let me try. Maybe it's biased because they have the most posts. I mean, that's my hypothesis. That's
Activity does gets that into account, but the thing is that Facebook does not send straight the articles to fact checking just because they receive a lot of flags. First, there is an intermediate step. They do have also a machine learning algorithm that tries to correct for popularity and these kind of things, and only after the article passes also this automatic check, it gets sent. And what we received was a thing after the black magic that Facebook does. So the fact that some sources just post more, it's already taken into account. It's the simplest machine learning thing that you can say. You just control for the source activity or the source popularity also, and then just send if they get more than expected. That was already taken into account, and they still get the most flags. The problem of doing this kind of research that we wanted to do, trying to explain this, is that you are trying to hypothesize what happens inside the head of people, and that's not very easy to crack open and try to observe. And it doesn't leave a lot of traces in the data that we have. So the approach we decided to take was to use this agent-based model. So we just create this simulation where we create a social network that is completely synthetic with synthetic people in it, with synthetic news sources. And then we just say, okay, well, let's assume that there are very simple rules in this system, and then let's see what these rules imply in the flags that these people determine. And so we try to build it as simple as possible. We say, okay, well, a person has an opinion, which is a polarity value between -1 and 1, left wing, right wing, and also news sources has an opinion between -1 and 1. And so whenever a user sees a news item coming from a source, they just see how far that opinion is from mine. If it's very close, I'm going to share it with my friends because I really like it. And so I think that my friends should read it. If it's very far, I'm going to flag it because, it's outrageous. It's like, how can anybody write this kind of fake things? Right? So the user only sees stuff that either they read directly from a news source or their friends share them with them. Those are all the rules of the game. And we see that if you do that, you just end up with an overwhelming number of flags that ends up in the neutrality part. So like all the sources that have a polarity of 0, they get the most flags. Now you can crack open this system and try to figure out where are these flags coming from. And the thing is that when you have a very central news source that is very neutral, the news item that he publishes, they spread in the network very, very far and wide because they're on average close to everybody. So they are able to enter into the echo chambers in the communities of super extremist people, and they flag them because they really dislike neutrality, because for a person that is very, very right wing, neutrality looks like left wing.
there's a bias because it's the most widespread.
Yeah.
And what you're saying is there is a Nash equilibrium that people turn to the center, but in this case, they criticize the center.
Exactly. Because the thing that these very extremist communities produce, it doesn't get out of the echo chamber. None of the moderates sees them. If the moderates were to see them, they would flag them, but they don't see them because it just doesn't propagate outside those communities. And so that's exactly what's happening here. And so that's what we find with this like simple agent-based model.
Cool. There's another research you wanted to talk about the generalized Euclidean distance. And I have to say, I've read it. I did the mistake of trying to read one of the references. I think it was Schumann's paper about the signals on graphs. Yeah, it was.
That is some tough math.
Yeah. Sort of. Hold our hand while talking about the subject.
Well, I'm definitely not going to try to explain the Schumann paper because I think that I'm grossly underqualified to actually explain it to you.
Can you start with the title and what's the subject of the research, and of course its application?
Yes,
Okay,
of course. So the paper we are talking about is like this generalized Euclidean distance to estimate the distance covered by propagation events in a network.
Great name.
I'm very bad at naming things, as all scientists are. So the idea here is that you have a social network, let's say, and you have something propagating through it. For instance, a disease, like an example that is not on anybody's minds these days. And so you observe this network, and at some point in time, some people are sick and some people are not. And then you wait a month, and some other people are sick, and some of the sick people have recovered. So, how far did the disease travel in this network? So, is this disease traveling fast? Is it slow? What can we say about the speed of transition of this disease? Interestingly enough, there isn't really a way to do that because if you want to estimate network distances, very easy way to do it when you only have like two nodes. That the distance between two nodes is super trivial. It's just the shortest path between these two nodes, the number of edges. But when you have a disease moving, you have groups of nodes, like the distance between two groups of nodes that can then be affected by disease at different levels. Some can be very sick and some may be just not very sick. So they're affected by the disease at different levels. How do you do that? And this problem can be, it's just a general form of many other problems. You can have a viral marketing campaign where you want to spread news about your fantastic new product or podcast to everybody, and you do your campaign, and then you had some people who knew your podcast before and then some people who knew it after. How do you know that your campaign was successful? How far did this campaign went? There can be other things like for instance the product space that I already mentioned. You have a country exporting some products in 1970 and then in 2012. How much did it change? Like how much did it move through the product space? So like just being able to answer that question is super interesting and has so many applications.
When you said about the epidemiological aspects of the work, we have on the models SI, SIR, SCIR, you have the R naught, right? To understand how contagious the plague is.
Yeah.
What you're saying is you complete the picture by saying not just how contagious it is, but what's the speed of the contagion. Can you say that?
Yeah, you can say that. In fact, the two are related. Like, for instance, if I run an SIS or an SIR process on a network, and then I forget all about the contagion parameters that regulates how this thing spreads in the network, and I just calculate the distance, you can recover that parameter by just looking at the distance. So it's a very strong predictor of that. And then, the two are correlated, but not exactly the same. So they're looking at slightly different things. But they are strongly related. So yeah, you can totally do that.
That's amazing because in the popular talk, between epidemiologists, which means everybody these days, R naught is the most talked about concept. And what you're saying is, don't just look at how much the virus duplicates itself. Look at what's the speed that it infects people.
Yeah, and I have some bachelor students right now that are doing some super interesting project using this measure with corona data, and they see that there is this super cool thing that if it holds, for now it's just preliminary, but if it holds is absolutely amazing. Is that the network distance measure increases as a spike right before the actual number of cases start to grow, and then also as a spike when the number of cases drop. So that means that basically the disease is like kind of moving into the network, and at some point it starts moving very very fast in a particular week, and then in the week after that, the number of cases will go up. And my theory, that is absolutely speculation and absolutely not at all verified or anything. So just to be clear,
I'll stop recording. Okay.
is that basically the disease is like moving from, okay, it was in a community, it was somewhere, and it just affected the people it could affect, and then it's like just jumping into a different place in the network where it hasn't affected the people yet, and then you wait for the incubation and boom, the number of cases will skyrocket. So it's like looking at this speeds of propagation in the network doesn't tell you the number of cases. It tells you when the number of cases are about to go very very much up or they're gonna go very very much down. So it could be a way to predict before the spike happens that a spike is coming.
I understand why it predicts when the plague is going to go up, but why the virus spreads faster when it's going down?
So it's not that it's spreading faster. This is a little bit of the nature of the counterintuitive nature of this network distance, is the fact that it's not that the virus is spreading faster, it's just that
It goes further.
exactly it goes further, and growing further also means shrinking. So that the network is just a pure distance. So it's like it also has a sense of scale. So for instance, when you go from 1 to 2, you're doubling in size. So you are just moving by a factor of 2, let's say. But you're also moving by a factor of 2 when you go from 2 to 1, because you're halving the size. So the network distance just take the absolute value of the distance that is covered, and it doesn't know which direction it went. It could have gone up or it could have gone down. So the disease is moving. Also, a disease that is disappearing from a network is, in a sense, moving.
Goes by a power, but you don't know if it's a plus or minus.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, then you can just look at other data and you can infer whether it's a plus or a minus. So that's not a problem.
So I guess we should hire someone to check if it's a plus or a minus.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a cool job. And when I read it, I had a question which I'm dying to ask someone. I've seen you use the Dosh-Renyi model, and my layman question is why? No, seriously, why do scientists use ER models when I guess we know it's not real world networks, and in my humble opinion, doesn't have many applications? Discuss.
I obviously cannot speak for all network scientists, so there are many network scientists out there that probably are going to disagree with me. But the way I personally use the Erdős-Rényi graph model is as a baseline, in the sense that if what I am looking at works in the Erdős-Rényi model exactly the same as it works in all the other type of networks, it means that like the network structure on which this thing is happening doesn't matter. Because the Erdős-Rényi model basically does not have many, as you say, real world properties. It doesn't have this power law distribution. It doesn't have communities. It doesn't have clustering. So if the networks that do have those things, like you can do a stochastic block model with communities, you can impose a power law distribution on it. If the two things works exactly the same, the Erdős-Rényi and the stochastic block model works exactly in the exact same way, it means that perhaps what I'm looking at is not really a network thing.
So you look at it as a control group.
Exactly.
Okay. So when people say it works on Dosh-Renyi, you should take it.
I mean, it also depends on what the it is, right? If you have a community discovery algorithm and it works on Erdős-Rényi, then you're doing something really wrong.
That's a network science joke. Won't catch on.
I mean, it's a network science podcast, right? So
Yeah, so it won't catch on. Okay, so just trying new things. You know, it's some A/B
yeah.
testing. Can you take me through the applications of the paper?
Yeah, so for instance, one of the things that you can do is trying to use it to figure out whether the propagation event that you're looking at is actually using the network or not. In the paper, there is an experiment that I do with this social network about books. And basically, I say, okay, well, there is this social network. There are people that are friends with each other. And then all these people are telling me what books they have read. And I have 6 observation of this network. So I have like big temporal span of 6 months. You can ask yourself, is this book really propagating because of word of mouth? So it's like people are getting advice from their friends on what to read? Or is it something else that has made this book very popular and just appears in the network by an external force? And you can with this measure, because if a book is propagating extremely ridiculously fast, it means that it's very unlikely that it's actually using the edges of the network. It means that there is something else that is making people start reading the book. While if I get advice from friends, the book is actually using the links, and so it will move slowly in the network.
What you mean is if it propagates from an outside source, I'll see shorter links or even no links between the labeled nodes that read the book. And if it propagates from word to mouth, I should see long paths in the network.
Yeah, so exactly. Like to re-say what you just said is that a book that comes from the exterior will affect or whatever it will be read by people who are not connected to each other. While if instead it's a word of mouth, it will affect people who are connected with each other, and these will cause the network distance to be shorter because people are connected to each other versus longer distances because people are not connected to each other. And so, if it was propagating through the network, it would have to go with this many edges. The fastest book that we see in the data are Harry Potter books and the Millennium Trilogy by Stieg Larsson. This is a Scandinavia podcast now. And the thing is that in the period of observation that we have the data, a new Harry Potter movie came out, and also the movie about the Stieg Larsson book came out, the Millennium Trilogy. And so these are exterior events that people say, "Oh, that this was a cool movie. I'm gonna read the book." While the books that are moving slowly are books that are classic of either international literature or Italian literature.
Okay, cool. And I have a couple of questions about the paper. If I understand correctly, you cut the network into time windows, and you have to have the same number of vertices in each window.
Yeah, not only the same number of vertices, but you have to have the exact same set of vertices. It's a little bit of a limitation of the paper.
As you said, it's a bit of a limitation. And what I'm curious about is it sounded a bit complex. When I read Schumann, it was like, okay, it's very complex. And I wondered why not use for the same goal a sliding time window, just to make sure you don't miss any jump, and take only the labeled nodes because you know which nodes are infected, which are not, and just do a simple BFS and look for the largest distance. Discuss.
So you could do that because there is an alternative approach that uses a different methodology than the one that I used that actually does shortest path. It's called the Earth Mover Distance, and it's basically an optimized BFS.
You've mentioned it in the paper, but you said it doesn't scale well.
Yeah, because calculating actually the shortest path is computationally rather complex. While my methods works with an assumption that like it's heat diffusion, right? You have some nodes that are hot, that are the origins of your propagation, and then they just diffuse around the network, and when they hit their destination, you can say what's the time where they hit the destination. It's the distance propagated. So that this is a very dumbed down version of the methodology. And my methodology requires the network not to change because you need this heat conduction to happen. So you can't do the sliding window. The Earth mover distance would allow to the network to change, although I haven't ironed out all the kinks of actually making that work. But you could do that. You definitely could do that. I mean, this is a great paper idea. You really should write the paper.
More a lover than a writer. But when you said it doesn't scale well because of the shortest distance, but you know the timestamp of each node, right? The infection time of each node. So if you take the current time minus the last edge that went in the node, you get the difference in times between their interactions. And what you're looking for is not, yeah, it's sort of the shortest distance, but I mean, it's like you turn the time between the nodes as the weight of the edge. And then the lighter the weight, the influence travels faster. And then you can use Dijkstra and so scale it up, right?
Yeah, I mean, it. When I say that it's time consuming, I'm always overly critical because it's not a method that I developed. So, but yeah, I
Okay.
mean, Dijkstra is the most efficient that you can do, but it still takes a little bit of time. And so when you start really looking into depth on how to implement this thing, then you realize that yeah, it's actually very complex. But I think that you're onto something super interesting, and maybe I'm gonna steal the idea. So
Well, luckily I forgot to press the record button, so feel free. Okay, I think we've covered your entire career. So
yeah, pretty much.
besides the cool papers, you have a great blog as the Atlas. It was very informative, funny, well written,
Thank
And
you.
the post I liked best, which you actually, when I said, let's discuss this post, I thought you'd be more enthusiastic. It's the community detection of community detections.
I love that
I
post.
think it was amazing, and I gave a lecture a week ago, and I thought it was very cool to show the different categories of community detection. But which community detection algorithm you used on the community detection? That's the thing I haven't.
Yeah, because like that's a great endorsement, right? If you do this kind of work where you're criticizing community discovery algorithm, and then you use a community discovery algorithm,
Exactly.
then the one you use, you're really really strong endorsing it. So I am gonna be honest. I used Infomap, that is like this, made by Roswell and Burston. It's a great algorithm. It's a fantastic algorithm. I wish I was like 10% as smart as those two people that made that algorithm.
And they have a cool website.
They're just fantastic visualizations. They're making a lot of work on the algorithm. Like it's not something like, yeah, when I develop something, then when I get bored, I just do something else, and my old project they just die. Well, they had some impressive grit in saying, okay, no, 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 this thing is important, and we're gonna keep working on it. They keep updating it. They keep adding features. It's an amazing software
Yeah,
project.
it really is. And what's your favorite post in the blog?
I think that the one that you chose is absolutely one of the
You
best.
downplayed it. That's it. That's it. Because I know why. Because no, no, it sounds nerdy, right? It sounds too nerdy. It sells. I don't know. Okay,
It is very nerdy. It's very meta. Like you make community discovery and then you apply community discovery on the community discovery, and it's just brilliant.
I reached to Rossetti about community detection. I think I'm going to do an episode with him.
But be careful in inviting too many Italians. They're gonna take over your podcast.
I thought about it. I engage mostly Italians. I don't know why.
Yeah, it's a mystery.
So I don't want him to be jealous, and I don't want to go there. So we'll put the community detection aside.
Let's do that.
Well, there is the upcoming conference of 2021, the Sunbelt and NetSci, INSNA and NetSci joining up. You'll probably blog about it, I
Yeah, I
guess.
mean, it's funny that you mention it because I think that if I have to say which are the type of posts that I write that are the most appreciated by the community, these are the kind of posts. I every time I go to a conference, I then try to write up, my impressions, the talks that impressed me the most in the conference and the interesting people I talk with. It's an interesting slice of life. The conferences are when science gets alive, and I think that the best work that I made, they were born out of an interesting conversation that I had during a conference. I really can't wait for starting conferencing in person again.
But you're on the conference. I mean, you have a
Yeah,
satellite.
I am involved in the conference in multiple ways. I have a few abstract that got accepted, so I'm going to present one of those. But I also am co-organizing a workshop, a satellite event on complex networks and economics. So with Morgan Frank and Lingfei Liu. This is the first time that this is happening. Network Science, NetSci, is the flagship event of particular community of network science, and Sunbelt is the flagship event for another community of network science. And the two events were separate, and there wasn't that much overlap between the two, right? I'm not saying that the two committees were not talking to each other because that's not true. There is a main list for the people who work in social network analysis that attend the Sunbelt event, but it's super exciting that the two flagship events happen at the same time in the same place to the same people. But the intermingling is really not going to be really there as much as it could be with the virtual format. And so I really wish we are going to do it together every year.
Do you want to elaborate about the
Yeah,
satellite?
so the satellite is it just means that it's like a sub event that is happening before the conference, and it is specifically laser focused on a specific topic of the conference. So the conference is going to be network science in general. So the satellites try to be a little bit more intimate. This specific satellite topic is about application of network science in economics and innovation. So the product space that I mentioned is a perfect example of trying to use the network science tools to say something about economic growth. Like, can we predict which are the countries that are going to grow or going to shrink their economies in the future just by using tools of network analysis? The business travel paper, we talk extensively about that. It's another perfect example of the kind of things that we are looking at. But that's not all. Like, there are great other works that use networks and they're related to innovation. We have one invited speaker, Yejin Ju. She's a researcher from South Korea that she works in Chicago at the moment. And she's done amazing work with networks of patents. So she uses the USPTO, the United States Patent Office, to figure out relations between inventions and how this system evolves over time, and try to figure out what are the network effects of this kind of combining new innovations and new inventions. Is it adding a new invention an additive increase in productivity, or is it a multiplication? And it's a multiplication. Like, every time you invent something new, you can combine it with everything else that was made before. And so a new thing, it's a square possibility of new things happening in the future. So that's super interesting stuff.
You mean like which patents are the platform for other?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Michele, it was a great talk. I had a really great time. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it was fantastic, and I'm gonna start listening to your podcast now, because I think that you're absolutely great host, and I'm sure that also the rest of the episodes are gonna be absolutely fantastic.
Okay, so I should interview more Italians. That's for sure.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure talking with you.
Bye bye. Did you enjoy and want to share? Have you suffered and you don't want to suffer alone? Tell your friends or rate us on Apple Podcasts, or like our Facebook page, or follow us on Twitter. The episode's notes and links are available on NETfrix site. That's www.snapod.net. If you're from Israel, rate us on Podcasts of Israel. The music is courtesy of Compile Band. See you in the next episode of NETfrix.